Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much all for being here on time. We've got a packed agenda. Territorial development in Europe in the digital age is the theme of this morning's session. And just to prove that we also do low-tech voting, I'm going to give you a quick question and ask you for 3 answers. So are you either 1, a digital native, somebody who's grown up digital? Are you a digital migrant, somebody who's transitioned to digitalization as part of their life? Or are you, like me, a digital dinosaur, somebody who hasn't yet really embraced digitalization? So hands up the digital natives, please. Okay. Most of them are under 35, but some of them are not. Hands up the digital migrants, people who've become welcome to our world. Thank you very much. And the digital dinosaurs, yes, well, I'll see you in the bar later, okay? We'll have a bit of a chat later on. We look forward to that. We're going to have 2 fantastic keynote speakers. We're going to have a panel of 4 people. At the end of this session, we're going to have a family photo as well. So don't forget to make sure you look right at about 11 a.m. We'll be going out to the stairs to do that. But before we get to that, let me just say that we're going to pick up, obviously, on the themes of the 2 opening remarks. So we're looking at the future of the EU in the digital age. We're going to try to understand how digitalization not just changes processes of economy or public services or social networking, but we're trying to try to explore the theme that Ilona was opening up. Does digitalization have the potential, the promise, to change spatial and territorial development patterns in Europe? The really key question of today. Or will digitalization somehow reinforce existing spatial and territorial development patterns? This is going to be the big question in the room, if you like. And we'll be trying to explore how digitalization might change those patterns, through which processes, economic, social, environmental, public services, leadership, civic engagement. But we'll also be thinking about how it might accidentally reinforce existing patterns. And you can imagine, therefore, a series of very big implications for policy that will come from that. So just before I introduce our 2 fantastic speakers, let's go back to Slido, if we may. We're going to open 2 votes. One of them is going to be a vote where I'll ask you to vote now, and we'll look at the answer immediately. And then the second one is a vote I'm going to ask you to continue throughout the morning by punching in as many times as you like individual words that occur to you as being relevant to the subject at hand. But first, let's go to our first question, if we may. So this is the next question in the Slido pack. Can we see it, please? Yes, we've done that. Okay, so are you optimistic about Europe's readiness for digital transition? It's a very broad question. You might be very optimistic, somewhat optimistic, or not at all optimistic. Please vote now. Now, Laurent was masterful in making sure 100 people voted, but I'm sure he bribed a few of you to get there. We got 91. We would like 100 if that's possible. So those of you who are texting your lovers, please focus on the voting. Be better. There we are with 100. Can we see the results, please? Okay, so vast majority of you are somewhat optimistic, and only 6% not at all optimistic. So we must ask the sober question, is this optimism well-founded? Okay, and we'll try to get to that in the conversation. Let's go to our next question, please. Thank you. Now, name the 3 key areas where digital transition will have the biggest effect, in your opinion, in the coming years. Now, this is not multiple choice. You can write here any words you like, and when you see other people writing words that you think, haha, that's a good word, you can endorse it or like it or favorite it with the thumbs up, which means that over the course of the morning, we'll be building a word map that is the answer to this question. You don't have to vote now, but if you'd like to vote now, please do. So we want you to put in words here. So the 3 key areas, could it be public services? Might it be entrepreneurship? Could it be territorial change? Might it be addressing the needs of people in isolated areas? Might it be something else? Yeah. and we want you to put in the words that you like, and then we want you to like the words that you see that you think are good. And we'll keep this going, and I will ask us to have a look at it various times during the session as it goes along. And then lastly, I want to say, as Laurent suggested, that during the course of the morning, while our keynote speakers are speaking, while our panelists are giving their reflections, if you want to start putting questions into Slido, and then you want to start favoriting or liking or endorsing the questions that others have asked, when we get to the Q&A session, we will then know exactly which questions have been ranked by whom. And this is a fantastic way also to use the people who are not here in the room but are following our debates today via the live streaming that's going on. So that's also a way for them to participate. So I hope all of that's clear. Is it clear? Yeah? You're going to be ready for the photo at 11 a.m.? Yeah? Good. Okay, let's go to our first keynote speaker of this morning. Now, many of you know Dr. Paul Timmers, International Advisor for Digital Policy and Economy, and many of you will know him as the former Director of Digital Society, Trust and Cybersecurity at the European Commission. It's a great pleasure to have Paul with us here today. As you know, he's both a scholar and an entrepreneur, a civic leader in his own right. He's going to pick up the theme of shaping the future of the EU in the digital age. Paul, welcome to Tallinn. The floor is yours.
And I must say, Greg, if you are a digital dinosaur, you are very dynamic and engaging, so that's a good way. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today on stage and present to you something about the future, the digital future of Europe. And let me start, first of all, by thanking and congratulating the Estonian presidency of the EU, because they have been really a digital presidency and have been really putting this on the agenda. And I can indeed recommend to follow what they say. I myself am an e-resident, and I'm going to set up a company here in Estonia using the e-residency scheme. I also would like to congratulate Finland today with its 100 years of independence. Very important that we all have our identity. And certainly thanking ESPON for inviting me, giving the opportunity to talk to you. I will quickly take you through a number of elements about the state of digital in the European Union. First of all, digital is everywhere. It's from your pocket to the plane, it's from the couch to the supermarket. I don't need to say that. And digital is big, big business. It's also big policy. It's Merkel, Macron, and others talking about it at major forums. It is the kind of thing where we actually have to recognize it's not Europe that is leading really in this. It's rather the US, it's China, it's what they call GAFA, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apples of this world. And we are increasingly seeing digital in all policies. And that's actually, I think, really a theme for the future, having digital in all policies and how you do that. So let's talk about some of the big trends. And I'm referring here to people that are major thinkers or analysts in the world of digital and in the world of technology. One of those is Mary Meeker. Worthwhile to read it up. She's got a 300-slide pack about the next 2 years. So this is just about the next 2 years. And one of the trends that she sees is how much more time people are spending online. Up to 6 hours a day spending online. And look at that right side. You see that half of that time is actually spent on the mobile. So the mobile is a real important thing, which you, of course, know, but you also need to make use of it. That's obviously the message from her side. And just one other element that she has is about the explosive growth of data. That's in all sectors of the economy, but here an important example about healthcare. So healthcare data is growing at 50% a year. 50% a year. It's massive amounts of data. Many more doctors are using electronic health records. Your health data can be collected from actually that same mobile phone or fitness device as I have here, and that's a very rich asset. Something else that has already been mentioned here. Broadband everywhere, but not really everywhere. Not so much yet in the rural areas, and that's a real risk. That's where we have policy for. Let me call it something else. Over the past year, there has been a wide debate in Europe, running until the summer roughly, organized by Atomium, a think tank, next generation internet debate. And in that one, they had they involved large newspapers like Le Monde, Frankfurter Allgemeine, Guardian, and they also had an online exercise with about 500,000 comments, which they actually analyzed with sentiment software. And they asked people, what do you think are the big technologies that will make profound change in the years to come in the way we learn, we work, we do commerce, etc., we govern? And number one, big data and AI, artificial intelligence, digital manufacturing and online platforms, IoT, Internet of Things, so just remember the abbreviation, IoT, open source, blockchain, and you will not be surprised if you have just followed what happens around blockchain in the skyrocketing pricing in the stock markets, and a number of other technologies. So this is what people expect as the big technologies. And indeed, these kind of technologies are also coming back when you ask, for example, the World Economic Forum, when they talk about what's going to change in cities. Yes, they do talk about Internet of Things and about mobile technologies. They talk about big data. They talk also about this EID, like the e-resident that I have in my pocket. They talk about data analytics. And the areas that they see changing in cities are around all of these city functions like power, electricity, transport, public services, health, and what have you, in the areas of outsourcing these services, in integrated city services, end-to-end transport, which is a real struggle in many cities. I invite you to come to Brussels and try to do smooth end-to-end transport, and probably London, you might say the same about that. Sharing and circular economy, a thing that's very much in the picture, and interesting that they allocate that to cities, and city advisory services. So they are seeing the same technologies interacting in a transformative way in cities. So what are then the big expectations? Well, let me first mention one big expectation. If you just look a little bit further, 25 years ahead, in 2043, Ray Kurzweil, who's one of the thinkers about how technology is impacting all of us very much and is saying this is an exponential development, he's saying in 2043, so just 25 years from now, and I think all of us will still be there then, you can buy for the price of a computer today the capacity of 1 million human brains. And you may not take it seriously, but many of his predictions actually have come true. So one of the big expectations is that it actually will go ever faster. And indeed, the rate of major change is doubling every 20 years. So in the last 20 years, we had 3 big changes. That is social media, if you look back, the mobile phone, and the internet. So in the next 25 years, until Ray Kurzweil prediction can be tested, we will have 6 big changes. And what does that actually mean? Because these changes are really big, you know, it really makes a difference. Social media, you are just using here, Slido, the mobile phone, the internet, just to mention, obviously. Big changes that have happened to us. There will be 6 of those in the next 25 years. Let's just think about it. What would that mean for the digital transformation and territorial thinking? It certainly means that you cannot sit on your hands, as they say in Belgium. You have to act. Now, let's just take a few of those big expectations. What might happen? Well, one of that is we might all become much smarter and more productive with artificial intelligence, because we will have that as a tool in our hands. We will get much more abundance. We will become richer, as a matter of fact, with this richness of data and Internet of Things. All the devices, Internet of Things is all these devices that can be connected everywhere, that are collecting data from your mobile phone to a sensor about temperature or electricity consumption or air quality. And we will live longer and healthier. Let's look at that. Well, indeed, smarter with artificial intelligence. If you follow the press, you know that Facebook is now using artificial intelligence software to predict when people are inclined to commit suicide. So actually, artificial intelligence is very accurate in predicting this kind of potential behavior. Artificial intelligence doesn't need to be huge and big. If you have just 205 neurons, these kind of things are working with artificial neurons, this artificial intelligence, you can very accurately predict and recognize a face. And face recognition is going to be everywhere if it isn't already happening right now. Smart cars is very much in the picture, self-driving cars. And actually people are saying the combination between robotics, so that's smart kind of mechanics, you might say, and electric cars is made in heaven. But you can also use artificial intelligence for the social good. IBM has launched a challenge to use artificial intelligence, deep science, and cloud computing, you know, that's where you store all this data and where you can do the computing, to use it for societal challenges like climate, like migration, like health, like food. So we will become smarter with artificial intelligence. We can also benefit a lot from this abundance of Internet of Things, of these devices that are everywhere that can collect data and data itself. I, for example, have become a user of a smart meter, a little plug smart meter at home, and I discovered that I was using a tremendous amount of electricity due to one device that actually I could replace. It was a fridge. And you can, this kind of stuff, it's already actually a bit old-fashioned. You can just buy it today and use it. That's an Internet of Things, and you can use it to your own benefit. You can monitor what is happening in your bed. Well, not everything that is happening in your bed, but whether your bed is very healthy, the bed bugs, they can be tracked with an Internet of Things, and the data can be analyzed. And the big thing about Internet of Things and data is expected to be happening in industry. It's called Industry 4.0. It's the transformation, so you make all of the manufacturing intelligent, and you can really start doing tuned manufacturing. And it's a big transformation that's happening right now. A lot of money in that. As a matter of fact, you can see that manufacturing, this is not so easily readable, but that manufacturing is one of the biggest revenue generators already in Internet of Things, but all of these areas are growing at 10, 12, 15, 20% a year, from manufacturing to healthcare when you talk about Internet of Things. And a lot of good coming out of that. One of the good things that might be coming out of that is that we are going to live longer and healthier. So I, for example, on my mobile phone, I have this app called Babylon, with whom I can talk to a doctor. Actually, it's an artificial doctor. I can tell what are my symptoms, it's giving advice, and the moment that it cannot go further, it will connect me to a real doctor or to a device that can monitor my vital signs. And so that's artificial intelligence used to make me healthier. We have very advanced stuff like, you know, picking up your brain signals. This is a very charming story about a young guy in Italy who was paralyzed from his neck downwards, couldn't participate anymore, got this kind of brain signal device that picked up what he thought, and with his thinking, he can actually steer his wheelchair. So his mother said, I'm so happy he's independent again. He can participate again, thanks really to this way of controlling his own mobility. And controlling mobility, we will have many, many elderly people. In some way or another, we need to address this. They cannot all be in a care home. People will have to continue living independently at home, and that includes mobility like smart walkers. And some people are even saying death is obsolete. Well, perhaps it's true. We'll see. So, living longer and healthier, becoming richer thanks to data and Internet of Things, becoming all smarter and more productive with artificial intelligence, that's our future ahead. Well, I don't think that story is quite the story that's going to happen. It's a happy story, but it's not going to become true. Why not? Because there are many downsides to it. There's a dark side. So if you ask in this big survey that was done over the past year, people in Europe, what do you think are the downsides or the dark sides of all these technological developments? Number one, they mentioned security. So cybersecurity, hacking, those kind of things. We don't feel secure and safe anymore in this digital world, is what they are saying. Or staying in control. Is it the machine that is taking over rather than us taking still the decisions? Is it that self-driving car that does everything and we are out of control? Or are we not empowered anymore? Are we becoming the slaves of the machine? We will have to follow the machine rather than the machine following us. And what about employment and inequality? Who will still benefit from that, and where are the jobs going to go? And other concerns around the proper legal framework and actually what they call the stupidity of AI. I recommend that you look up this study because there's a lot of rich information about the expectations and the concerns. So the dark side of one of those could actually be around jobs. So will digitization and going on the internet deliver meaningful work for everybody and generate salaries that are at least equal or better than the current levels of salaries? And again, asking that same large group of people, there were thousands of responses, over 50% says, no, it will not contribute. And others are more positive, but 50% at least is concerned about this digital future in terms of the quality and the level of work. And indeed, McKinsey says Under most scenarios, so they talk about work and jobs, the transitions will be very challenging. It will match or even exceed the scale of the shifts out of agriculture and manufacturing that we have seen in the past. Think about that. This was an agricultural society 100 years ago. There's now 5% agriculture. In most areas in Europe, I think it's around that, 5%, 3%. That's an enormous shift. Imagine that this happens to jobs. And indeed, there are millions and millions of jobs that are predicted to be affected. And then something else about AI and Internet of Things and data and longevity. Are there going to be haves and have-nots, those that are in and out? What people are thinking, again, when you ask them across Europe, they are saying the ones that will benefit most from that are young citizens and the big tech companies and the startup companies, and the ones that will be benefiting least are the older citizens. It's the public sector. It's public organizations. So there's a concern there, for sure. And what will that actually do to our retirement plans? So yes, there are upsides and downsides, and we will have to balance that. And that's what policy, and that's what this seminar is also about. That's the thinking, that's the shaping that you will do. And so there are some very difficult questions in this digital policy that we will have to tackle in policy development. For example, who owns the data? The data that is going from my device, I've got a Fitbit here, is it owned by me or Fitbit? It's personal data, but what is Fitbit doing with it? What is it when they get more value out of it because they analyze my Fitbit with all your Fitbits and then create a new service? Is that my value or is that their value? Can they give my information to someone else? What about the free flow of data across borders, but also in the industry? Can everybody use data for the greater good? What about digital sovereignty? Are we going to become completely dependent upon others in the world, and don't we have our autonomy anymore? And what about the 100 years of independence of Finland? What about democratizing and humanizing AI? Making AI, artificial intelligence, accountable so that we actually understand what the algorithms do. And we can say, yes, I agree with that decision, or I do not agree with that decision. And what about the good and the bad and the ugly of the sharing economy? Not everything is rosy in the sharing economy, and there are great concerns about what some of, for example, the rental schemes are doing to the quality of cities. So there are difficult policy questions. Let me then finish. I think in these policy questions, there are a number of policies that you may want to look at specifically. They are in evolution, but you can make use of them when you look at this whole spectrum of the expectation of technology. Plugging the broadband gap, that's obvious. We need to have broadband and capable broadband everywhere, and there's European policy under discussion right now for that, the Electronic Communications Code. And then data, I would focus especially on that. If as a city, as a region, as a territory, you're not yet digitizing your data, you are missing a tremendous asset, and someone else will do it for you. So digitize the data that you have in the cities, that you have in the region, whether it's about tourism, mobility, health, the people living there, whatever you can do. Make sure it's digital and that it is under control of the citizens. And that's where we have policy, the free flow of data policy and the general data protection regulation about data protection. E-services, digital service roads, and actually the electronic identity card is part of that, so that you can deliver services across regions, inside and across regions. Services for transport, mobility, for energy, for health, for taxation, what have you. Certainly pay a lot of attention to cybersecurity. All of your efforts may be in vain when your information is stolen or when you get hacked. Put digital to work in the urban and regional agendas that are there in Europe for you to use and for you to further develop. And we'll hear more about that. And go digital in all sectors. There are no sectors excluded. All sectors are going digital. All sectors will have to amend their policy. And this is about e-government, this is about transport, it's about energy, it's about health, it's about the environment, all of these sectors. And that's where you can do a lot of good and a lot of bad with digital. And then shape your own future, participating in the research programs, in the territorial development programs, setting up and developing the territorial governments. So a whole richness of policies. My wish would be that this is happening by you in a human-centered way in digital transformation in the territorial thinking. Thank you very much.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. And you brilliantly came in on exactly 15 minutes. And colleagues, I didn't tell you at the beginning, but we're operating a musical guillotine today, which means that any speaker who speaks beyond the allotted time, music will start to play just as they go over it. Paul perfectly timed his, but all other speakers, beware. The musical guillotine is there. Paul, you told us many important things. Particularly, you focused on the exponential nature of these new technologies, and you spoke about the high expectations. You said three things. We might be smarter and more productive. We might be able to work much better with IoT and big data, and we might live longer and be healthier. But then you said, yes, indeed, digitalization can help in these ways, but don't forget the three big downsides: security, data governance, cybersecurity, legal frameworks, jobs, the loss of jobs in the economy that may be possible because of this, and then the digital divide, the haves, the have-nots, the sharing economy, issues to do with aging. You gave us 7 rather brilliant propositions about which policies are going to be important. I won't repeat all of them because you said them very cleverly, but you particularly focused on the interaction between digitalization, governance, space, lifestyle, and your final message was shape your own future. So just to check how many of you were listening, let's ask you some quick questions. How many of you have already consulted the online doctor? If you have, please raise your hands. Okay. How many of you would like to consult the online doctor? Let's see. Okay. How many of you will never consult the online doctor? Okay, very good. Okay, how many of you are spending more than 6 hours a day online? This was Paul's first point. If you are, raise your hands. Okay, if you're not, raise your hands. If you don't know how to do that, raise your hands. Okay, right. It's only me, it seems. This is a bit of a problem. And then how many of you want some kind of digital thing that monitors all of the activity in your bed? Do you want it? If you do, raise your hands. No? Okay, well, so Paul, you suggested it, but nobody seems to want it. So I don't think you're going to win the Dragon's Den with this application, but very interesting. Fantastic. And Paul will be joining the panel later on, so we'll have a chance to talk a lot more with him. Now, let's go back to our friend Laurent, who is the Deputy Director of the ESPON program. And Laurent is going to talk to us in particular about the territorial and urban dimensions in digitalization of public services. So, Head of Unit for Evidence and Outreach at ESPON EGTC, please welcome back Laurent Friederes. Seems like you're getting lucky.
I'm getting lucky?
Yes, that was the song that introduced you then.
So, very good. But
Yeah.
the clock has started. Okay, so there we go. So good morning again. Digital tools and solutions are transforming public services and the way governments serve the needs of their citizens. And some cities have already started adopting new solutions and transforming their processes, but there are still many challenges ahead. There's a large hole outside, on the pavement outside my house. I've been walking past this for quite a while, and a few weeks ago I decided to take action. So my city, like so many cities, is going digital, so they now have an app. This app allows you to track buses, to track parking spaces, to see what events are on. And it also has a particular feature that allows you to report particular incidents or issues in the infrastructure. It was 2 weeks before the local elections, so I thought, why not? Let's try my luck. So I took a picture of my pavement. There it is. And I submitted it via the app. So what the app does, it essentially logs all these incidents that are reported by citizens. So my little picture with a short note just to say, I think the photo was quite self-explanatory, but to say, the pavement is broken. So up it went into the app, and it was mapped along with a series of other incidents here on the map, on the map that you can see. So a couple of days later, very exciting. So the status changed, and my little photo was assigned an incident number. I think if something is assigned an incident number, it makes it quite serious. So the status of this issue was confirmed, so you see a little orange thing there. And then not much happened. The elections came and went, my pavement was still broken. But then last week, what happened? Something changed. we had a little green box that appeared. It wasn't actually terminated. In French, it means completed. So my little incident was completed. I was a bit confused because my pavement was still broken. So what had happened? There was a little note attached that said, well, so your little incident was passed on to the service for infrastructure and has been assigned to the program for being fixed. So hopefully my pavement, when I get home at the end of the week, will be fixed. So what does this little example tell us? The way cities engage with their citizens is really changing. So the engagement, this particular example allowed me to engage very directly with my local administration. It creates transparency, so I created this incident report, and I was able to track the progress. It also has a fundamental impact for the administrations themselves, because they have to change their processes, they have to change the way in which services work with one another. So in this case, the service that runs the website, of course, has to communicate with the services that runs the road infrastructure. It also raises issues of trust. In this particular instance, I submitted this report anonymously because all this data is available. And I wasn't quite sure what they were going to do with it. So they might send me the invoice at the end. So I figured, let's do it anonymously. So there's certainly issues of trust and data security that need to be addressed. The digital transition is really reshaping public services. We've heard some of the key messages already from our policy brief by Predo in the introduction. The vast majority of city services have improved as a result of digitalization. The policy brief that ESPON has prepared, and you can find a copy outside, we surveyed over 130 cities in Europe and asked the chief digital officers what is the status of the digital transformation of their city services. And the results is essentially what you see inside the policy briefs. So more than 1 in 3 cities has seen a substantial increase in the uptake of specific services as a result of digitalization. Over 2/3 of cities also use the data that they gathered from these new digital services to improve decision-making processes. Costs have been reducing. But then, of course, also there is the challenge of jobs. So also 3 in 5 cities has seen a reduction in staffing, although for most this was a marginal reduction. So ESPON being ESPON, of course, we try to map this particular transition. So we looked at different types of services. So for 9 different service themes, from spatial planning to education and healthcare, we looked at the level at which the digital solutions are being implemented. So is this at local level, at regional level, or at national level? And there are some differences. So you can see here that for spatial planning and construction, it's primarily at the local level that services have been digitalized, whereas for healthcare and road infrastructure, it's really at the national level where the transition is taking shape. So we try to map all this. You're very familiar, most of you, I assume, with ESPON maps, but we try to come up with a little bit of an innovative format. So inside the policy brief, you find a map that looks a little bit like this. And what it shows you is the share of service digitalization. So little boxes that are in red have a low level of digitalization, and in blue, a high share of digitalization. And we mapped this so for different regions in Europe, so you can compare Northern Europe to Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and Southern Europe. And for the specific, so 9 different service themes and 57 specific services, we mapped essentially what the share of digitalization is for specific services. So you can compare the level of digitalization for towns for particular services to the national level. If I take a particular example here, so for Northern Europe, obtaining land use and cadastral data online, so if you go from the left to right, you see that towns have a very low level of digitalization. That's the first box. The third box is larger cities, so there the level of digitalization is very high. At the regional level, it's quite low, and at the national level, it's also quite high. So what are the drivers of this digital transition of public services? Clearly, it is about modernizing the city services. It's about increasing efficiency. It's also about improving the citizen experience, as we've seen in the first example. There are some differences between towns, smaller cities, and larger cities. For example, the towns and medium and small-sized cities have a higher share where the drivers are the modernization of the city services. Perhaps surprisingly, extending the range of services or the coverage are not amongst the top 3 drivers in this instance. So how do we go about bringing about this digital transition? Strategy is really key. So we asked the cities whether they have a digital strategy in place. And here we can see that there's still quite a lot to be done. So in gray are the cities that have not yet adopted a digital strategy, and in dark purple you see the ones that have implemented. So the level of implementation of digital strategies is still quite low. And generally smaller towns and cities are lagging behind in terms of the adoption of the digital strategy, but also, of course, in the implementation. So what about the challenges for implementing the digital transition? Perhaps not surprisingly, funding is the #1 challenge, and this applies to any city independent of size. But there are also other challenges where there are some differences between cities of different sizes. So for example, the smaller cities and towns, they face a bigger challenge in terms of lacking an overall strategy, in terms of still having a resistance to adopt digital solutions. Skills are quite a significant challenge for cities of all sizes. Then larger cities have a higher share of them consider security concerns and also the particular legal framework to be barriers. That may also be a fact. The reason for that may also be that they have perhaps progressed further in the adoption of digital solutions, so they have already adopted their strategy, so they've now moved on to other barriers. But clearly security and having the right legal frameworks are key. The way to deliver this new digital solutions clearly involves collaboration. So these are engaging with other peers, with other cities in Europe, in understanding which services they have digitalized, what are some of the best practices, but then also developing partnerships, collaborations with the private sector. So also the solution providers who end up delivering some of these solutions. And what's come out from the study is that the level of engagement in these collaboration networks, in partnerships, has a direct impact on the improvement to city digital services. And towns and smaller cities are really lagging behind in terms of developing their collaborations and in terms of engaging in these public-private partnerships. So there's really more to be done in that area. So what is the impact? It's been mentioned already before, but in terms of improvement to city services, I think the evidence here is overwhelming that city services have improved as a result of digitalization. It's a slightly smaller share for towns, but it's still very significant. And in terms of the uptake of services, so this is essentially cities delivering a new service in a digital way, seeing an increase in the uptake of that particular service. Here, essentially universally for larger cities, that they have seen an increase in the uptake of services. Towns and smaller and medium-sized cities are lagging a little bit behind also in this particular area. So what are some of the key policy messages that have come out of this research? I think what we try to do is to really tailor these messages to the different levels, because the message is not that every city of each, independent of their size, should digitalize all its services. That is really not the point. That's also not the point of the mapping. But I think the mapping will really gives us a detailed picture of what the status is, and I think it will kind of feed the debate also on where do we go from here. So at EU level, I think a key is really to remove barriers to interoperability. I think this is really to drive the adoption of new digital services. I think creating a European platform for cities to share their data and services will also allow for a wider range of services to be delivered. And then we need supportive legal frameworks for digital solutions in many areas, but particularly in healthcare and social welfare services where privacy and security are major concerns. And there really more action is needed at EU level. There's a number of initiatives that are of course ongoing, but that is one of the key areas for action at EU level. So national and regional level, I think it's key to build partnerships to develop digital solutions in different sectors, but particularly in education and transport, where we see that digital transformation is primarily driven by the national and regional levels. Also, we've seen towns and smaller cities are lagging behind, so I think it's essential to support the digital transition of towns and smaller cities. So not every small town is able to digitalize its services, so it's key to also provide the necessary support to ensure that no town or city is left behind. Medium-sized and larger cities should invest in ICT infrastructure for local digital services. So even if you talk about the cloud, I think there's still an infrastructure behind it, both in terms of data storage, but also in terms of the communication networks, in terms of the fast mobile internet. So the next generation IT infrastructure is absolutely essential to facilitate the digital transition of public services. Then also, new solutions have to be tested, have to be piloted. So I think there's really an opportunity for medium-sized and larger cities to open up for the development, testing, and rollout of these new types of solutions. So they could be new mobility solutions, they could be new solutions in planning as well. So there's really an opportunity to build these public-private partnerships that allow the demonstration, the large-scale demonstration, and the piloting of new digital solutions. Then finally, for towns and smaller cities, some are still lagging behind in adopting a digital strategy, so it's absolutely key that cities do put this on their agenda and adopt a digital strategy. The key to the success of the implementation of the strategy is the appointment of a digital leader. So typically, digital transformation is a horizontal exercise. It affects different services, and there's a need for leadership in order to drive that transformation through local government in particular. And then really map and prioritize the service to be digitalized at local level. So the message is really not that perhaps you have a low level of digitalization in a particular area that you should speed up there, but it's really identify those services which should be served as a priority at the local level. For example, smaller towns may not need a sophisticated parking monitoring system or a mobility solution, but they may want to invest in solutions that drive citizen participation and engagement. And then really engage in collaborations and peer learning to find out more about best practices, and also to essentially develop the skills. I think the skills are really one of the key challenges that we face in Europe that allows public institutions to adopt those solutions. So those were the key messages. I would really invite you to take a look at the policy brief. There are copies outside, and of course, for the audience at home, it's also available online. I've given you a bit of an overview of some of the main messages, but of course, the interesting bits are sometimes in the details. So please take a look at the policy brief, and we look forward to discussing the various topics and the questions that were raised during this first panel, and then also in the policy labs later on this morning. Thank you.
Right, Laurent, thank you very much. So this is a fascinating piece of research that you've introduced, Laurent, where you talked about, in terms of usage, the increasing digitization of services, but you mentioned that in the mapping of this process of change, there's a marked divide between what is happening for cities and national level versus what's happening at the area of smaller towns and the regional level. And then this marked divide seems to have been carried through in some of the other areas, because when you talked about the challenges, you talked about funding and skills as being challenges for everyone, but you talked particularly about the smaller cities and towns lacking the capacity for integrated strategies or adopting a leadership position. You talked about the larger cities facing a new threshold of legal concerns and other kinds of regulatory dimensions. You talked a lot about partnership and collaboration being a key threshold for the smaller municipalities and smaller towns. You talked about the growing impact and said that there was a big uptake in services that had been digitalized, and also that these services were, in a sense, improving. But again, there was a strong territorial difference in terms of where that's happening. And then you gave us a very helpful matrix of policy imperatives at the EU level, the national level, the medium and large cities, and also the towns and the smaller localities. I won't go through all of those because they were very well summarized. So very, very helpful, Laurent. We're very grateful for you putting this to us. Let's, if we may, have a very quick look at how our word map is developing from the Slido comments. So we asked you to name the 3 areas where digital transition will have the biggest effect, in your opinion, in the coming years. The size of the words indicates the number of you who have either used that word or endorsed the use of that word by somebody else. So public, services, transport, education, administration appear very strongly. Round the outside, we can see a few things like relations, entertainment, culture, planning, industry. Please keep voting with this. We'll be looking at it again during the course of the morning and looking at it again at the end. So very interesting. A lot of focus in the room on the public services, the education, transport, social development issues. Please keep voting and please keep proposing words. We'd be delighted to hear those. Now, let's have a panel discussion and get into some of the nuances and bring in people who've got different perspectives on this topic. I'd like to bring Paul Timmers back onto the stage. Paul, please come and join us because people would like to ask you questions. Let's remember, both for people watching the stream and people here in the room, you can ask questions through Slido as well. We will also use the old technology of hands up. Let's bring to the stage, if we may, Anna Piripal, who's the Managing Director for Enterprise Estonia. Anna, welcome to you. Jonas Onland, the Program Manager for Digital Transition and the Urban Agenda at the City of Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And then Martin Brinskov, who's the Chair of the Open and Agile Smart Cities Program at Aarhus University in Denmark. Please welcome the panel. Panelists, thank you for joining us. We know that you've got a wide range of expertise to bring to this, and from different territorial levels, which I think is going to be very interesting. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to take about 4 minutes to offer their reflections on the conversation so far, picking up the key themes from their perspective and bringing to light the views that they have, the evidence that they're involved with about this key question of European futures, digitalization, the spatial dimension, the territorial dimension, and all of that. And Anna, we'd be really happy if you spoke to us first.
Yeah, thank you very much. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So in the Estonian showroom that I'm managing, this year, thanks to the presidency event, we had at least 50% more visitors and high-level decision makers from European Union, which is great news. And just 3 years from now, people are really pessimistic about whether this digital transition will work in their country after we shared the e-Estonia story with them. But even this year, we have German delegations, we have Belgian delegations, we have Netherlands delegations, and they are all kind of want to practically dive in and engage with Estonian experts. And why these people come to the showroom? So the basic facts, the #1 rank in the Global Cybersecurity Index, the #1 Entrepreneurship Index, #1 in European Union Commission in Digital Economy and Society and Public Services. So this is what brings people to learn from Estonian experience. And while we have a discussion and debate on whether we should do it and what are the risks, there are definitely many, many risks. If we look at the facts, what Estonia has experienced so far, we have e-identity that covers 95% of people. We know the privacy is empowered by identification of people. We are saving 2% of GDP from digital signature, which is legal, by the way, in Europe. But we use digital signature, we're given more of them than the whole European Union combined. And it's funny that 2% of GDP we're saving and 1% is a national, from the GDP is usually what we spend for the development in the e-governance field and innovation. When looking at the data exchange that, as mentioned, we implemented in 2001 and has been using with no stop till today, it's around 800 years of time annually that we are saving, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the working hours of real people, not considering the data-to-data, machine-to-machine data exchange. So, and 99% of state services, therefore, because of identification and data exchange, are enabled, and people can use them no matter of their location. Whether you live in a small town, you can get still the healthcare service that you need, or you can get the public service that you need. In some services, you don't even need to have any ICT skills, like in case of the digital prescription that is working worldwide in Estonia today, and actually will be working in Finland because the data exchange will be organized with it as well. So in my perspective, digital technology can erase the real boundaries of the countries. It will do it. Companies and people will choose which residents, which services to subscribe to. Like the best example for me, the e-resident, the fresh e-resident, the former director of DG Connect. So the environment that European Union could build with technology to simplify all this administration will not necessarily reduce the workspaces. It will create a whole big market and a community of new companies who can come and work in European Union, who can contribute to the economy, SMEs, and people who will be empowered to become business people because doing business would be so simple. So e-residency is a program, for example, for this. And its economic impact is estimated by 2025 by almost 1.8 billion euros to our economy coming from abroad. So we need to do this change. That's our key message. Please, since there are many researchers here, dive into what Estonia has experienced so far when you're speaking about the societal change or the economical impact or the impact on businesses and doing business, and take these lessons to European Union level policy. Thank you.
Great. Anna, thank you very much indeed. So to summarize very quickly, you talked about a transformation in public services, but I think you also talked about a change in the business climate and environment, and particularly in the entrepreneurship model that this enables. You were talking, I think, on some level about fostering a digital competitive advantage, and you're also, in a way, talking about the fruits of adopting a digital brand. We'll come back to all of that in the conversation. Let's go to Jonas now, if we may. Jonas, the floor is yours for 4 minutes to give us your reflections.
All right, thank you. First of all, I'm really honored to be here, and Estonia for us, we're really jealous, basically. The things that already that are accomplished here is very good for us to learn and to work on that. Me, as a program manager, I'm working on the digital transition within Eindhoven, in the city of Eindhoven, but also on a national level. And of course, in Europe with the urban agenda and the partnership of the digital transition, where we work together with 10 countries and cities combined, the European Commission, to work on this transformation that we're in. And it is happening. And the big question on that is implementation. A lot of the technology is already there, so the question is how to scale up, how to learn, how to help cities throughout Europe to not to reinvent the wheel, but to learn, to take the lessons learned and to implement it on a local level. With the partnership, we're working on a few goals, and there are two main challenges which are already presented this morning as well. The free flow of data. So how do we generate the value which is generated through data worldwide? As our alderman says, we're becoming a cash dispenser of Silicon Valley. So how does the value which is generated come back to our citizens? The second big challenge is how to safeguard the public interest. So basically, the examples of the questionnaire of MIT who's asking if you're in your self-driving car and it's deciding for you whether you drive into a woman with a baby or into a wall. It's a big ethical question. The algorithm is deciding, so we need transparency on those ethical questions as well. From that perspective, there's one big challenge and question which we also can learn from Silicon Valley, basically, is what's in it for me? Why is it working in the US? It's because they experience and look at the end user, look at what's the result for them. That's why people start using apps and everything. So with the partnership, we were looking at a quote and a purpose where we're going for, and with the partnership, we're trying to move forward towards meaningful technology that enhances the quality of life of every citizen it touches. It's a nice objective, of course, but meaningful technology, not like to have 20 apps every day, which sends you push messages, but much more focused on human-centered services. So the e-government focus and also the ownership of data is one real important key message. Not to reinvent it, like stated, but more how to implement that as a country and as a city. Because as a city of Eindhoven, we're just too small to do that. We need the national government, we need other cities to learn from those experiences. That's one of the main actions. Second part is how are we going to work on new technologies? So there are a lot of emerging technologies or digital technologies coming up, like of course 5G, which is starting at the Olympics next year, but also virtual reality, augmented reality, and there are a lot of challenges. Not only the legal framework, but also the principle and ethical framework where we need to focus on. There's a lot of research which is there. But how can we make a toolbox for cities if you want to start in your city implementing 5G? What do you need to take in account from a procurement perspective, principal perspective, but also legal perspective? Third part is the like already the haves and the not haves. So how can we maintain digital inclusion so that everybody can use the technology? And then again, one of the quotes from Estonia as well, which I heard, everybody can be digital. It's not. It's the only thing is you need good design so that end users can really use it on a very simple way that's easy to use. And it's very interesting to have those three actions. But the real concern is how do we work together? How do you innovate? So. And that's one of the things I didn't hear this morning that clear. You need not only the different layers of local government and European level, but you also within your innovation ecosystem need to work together with the education system, with citizens, with businesses and the local government. And that's a big challenge. We have a lot of experience in that, but it's challenging. So. The pace of change never will be this slow again, so it's an exciting time.
Jonas, it is indeed an exciting time. Thank you very much for that. You've really raised a very fundamental issue about ethical frameworks, public goods, citizen value, and how all of that is achieved and secured. And you've talked particularly about the frameworks for that, the regulatory frameworks, but also how you bring that to a conversation about digital inclusion and new technologies. Very quickly, another old-style vote. How many people in the room are confident that the ethical framework behind all of this digitalization is sound? If you think the ethical framework is sound, please raise your hand. If you think it might not be sound, raise your hand. Okay, so this concern is shared by lots of people in the room as well. Martin, can we have, please, your reflections? What have you made of this so far? Tell us your view.
Thank you, Greg. So yes, I'm an academic. I'm quite surprised to see that a third of the audience are academics or researchers.
But this is ESPON.
What? Yeah.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm not here in that respect. I'm here because I'm chair of a global network of cities called Open Agile Smart Cities, trying actually to tackle this across, the big ones and the small ones. So 2 reflections, and thank you very much, Paul and Laurent, for setting the stage. I think what we're missing at the moment is some mechanisms that can work in both the big context. I would consider Eindhoven an advanced example, and obviously also to me, coming from Denmark, Estonia is an inspiring example. So the question is, which mechanisms, which standards might work for everyone? Because that is actually one of the key missing things. Now, we could ask Silicon Valley to invent some, and I'm sure they're very happy to do so. But so your reflection on would that work? Well, I think from a European perspective, probably not. The question is then who will come up with an alternative? And in fact, local governments, cities and communities are a very relevant place to look, because this is where you find out whether you want sensors in your bed or whether the pothole registration works. But how many cities have a department for developing global standards? I know of 2. So how do we link these efforts with actually the insight and the needs of local governments and communities? I think that's a missing piece, but I also think there are some elements that are quite encouraging. So from the European Commission side, we have some frameworks. The European Innovation Partnerships and Smart Cities Communities have done a lot of work, and also under the leadership of Paul, in putting both quite developed cities and communities together with followers. So I think this is a very, very sound principle that we learn together. Another thing is that combining the excellence, the front runners, with the capacity building. So this is very much about cohesion, the conversation we're having in this room today. But there's another conversation about the avant-garde, what's the next, what's the VR, what's all the artificial intelligence and blockchain. So we need to somehow find fora where this can happen. And I was one of the ones registering as very optimistic, because I see that is happening. I think the foundations in Europe are there, and I think Europe and European cities and communities have actually the opportunity to lead the way through the ethical dilemmas, through the entrepreneurship from the companies. So what we need to establish from the cities and communities and the regional national governments is a common voice actually for these mechanisms, whether they're technical or they're, I would even say, ethical, but certainly the jurisdictions, the legal frameworks. We need somehow to find a coherent voice. So obviously from the network that I'm representing, this is happening now, I would say, very much under European leadership, but globally with 114 cities in 23 countries. So I'd invite everyone to check out that. But I would say actually with the representatives in the room and also the voices we have here, I think we're pretty much on the way to finding an alternative to just leaving it to the big fives, as it were.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. I mean, this is a really profound part of the conversation, actually, which is Europe's role in this from a global perspective. And you've said, firstly, you're very optimistic. Secondly, there's a leadership role to be played. And thirdly, that Europe is very well positioned to lead not just on these ethical issues that digitalization raises, but also these issues of digital inclusion. And you talked a lot about the partnership approach, the leaders working with the whole field, the role of networks and partnerships in making that happen. Fascinating stuff. We're going to come back to all of this. We've got about 27 minutes for a conversation now, and I have a lot of questions on my list, but I'm more interested in your questions than mine. So if you can put your questions into Slido, or in about 5 minutes when I ask you, raise your hands, that will be great. I can see some questions are already there, and you're already favoriting and supporting or liking particular questions, so that's good. But let me ask just a couple of questions first, and then we'll go immediately to the questions on the screen after that. So, Paul, I really want to ask you to pick up this kind of core challenge and just give us your view in simple language. Is digitalization going to concentrate and crystallize the existing spatial development pattern in Europe, or is it really going to disrupt it and change it?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert in that. So my kind of opinion, looking at it a little bit from a helicopter view, is that there are some very big trends, and digital is kind of only part of that. You know, the trends of migration, the trends of people moving into cities, the trends of the kind of activity and jobs that they are looking for. And digital can be used in a very fruitful way, I think, to then maintain cohesion. But you will have to work actively on it. And that means actively using digital for information provision, for what I've said before. Make sure that whatever you know about your territory, region, urban or rural area gets captured into data, and then make that available. And this, I think, comes back a lot also to what Martin says about standards and, for example, the availability of data to build these new services. And then, in a certain sense, you know, digital is a tool to maintain, increase, and perhaps also to decrease cohesion. So there's not, for me, a simple, definite answer to that. There are very powerful forces here at work, and digital we can use to the best that we think is feasible there, but we need to discuss what is the best. Not everybody agrees to that, and certainly what would be very risky is that we just let it happen. Because then, you know, you are out of control and you will feel that you have lost autonomy.
Great, thank you very much. Just a message to our team at the back. If we can list the questions by the most favorited, that would be very helpful. Thank you, brilliant. We'll come back to these questions in a couple of minutes because I want to put to Martin the same question I just put to Paul. How far is digitalization going to change the spatial patterns in Europe overall, and how much will it concentrate what's already there, in your view?
Well, I completely agree with Paul. I think it's going to change things fundamentally, but we should not let that just happen. I mean, we're seeing, I think, worrying signs of fragmentation. I will mention no nations here today, but I think that's a global trend, that digitalization can actually really fracture also communities. So we have a lot of questions coming up now already about inclusion and different age groups. So I think that would probably be my biggest worry, that we just think that digitalization is something positive. I think actually digitalization is a challenge. I mean, on the order of, you know, rising water levels and stuff like that. So the impact is profound. So I think we have to really see it as a challenge rather than just, you know, as a God-given opportunity to you know, optimize.
While we're talking about this, why don't you take question 2, Martin? How is artificial intelligence going to change territorial patterns in Europe? Any reflections on that?
Oh yeah, for sure. It really depends. It depends whether it is, I would say, well understood what it could do, because I think the main action we can do as societies is to ensure that our institutions and our communities actually can work with, say, artificial intelligence. So we need to understand in public government, in public services, how can that be both leveraged for good, and how can that be, let's say, cushioned, where it's going to have an impact. For instance, it can reveal stuff that we don't want revealed. I mean, housing prices, lots of actually very sensitive stuff when you just throw the algorithms at the world. So I think it all comes down actually, and in this context, this is very relevant, to capacity building. We need to build capacity to brace for the future.
Great, thank you very much. Jonas, you raised these big moral and ethical dilemmas, and before we go all the way into the questions on the screen, can you just tell us about how you think digital transition can help with some of these really big issues? Aging, shrinking populations, migration, climate change, the big social and environmental pressures Europe faces. Is the digital transition part of how we address those?
Yeah, there are a lot of, I think in the new technologies and the digital transitions, there are a lot of possibilities to work on these challenges. The thing is, they're huge, and you have to make it small again. So the way how we work together with people using technology can start, like stated this morning, participation is the basis for trust and growth, basically. So you need to use these technologies to show the results that it's working, and make it grow from there. Because if you make the challenges too big, it's not gonna work. The biggest challenge in Holland on e-health, for example, is the technology is there. You see them; they were already there 3 years ago. The question is how to accelerate and how do the end users start using these technologies, and eventually the results will be that you cope with these big challenges. So yeah, I think it's on IoT sensoring within your city, on climate changes, self-driving cars, electric cars will solve a lot of these issues. Question is how to implement these technologies within your city. And that's the biggest challenge, in my opinion.
Great, thank you very much. And Anna, again, before we come to a rather juicy question that's there for you, just tell us a little bit more about how Estonia has tackled this issue of social cohesion and equality. If I may say, some of the obvious benefits for Estonia have been around competitiveness, enterprise, business brand, efficiency. What about the inclusion and social cohesion part of the story?
Well, a little bit reflecting on some of the questions also.
Yeah.
Let's take the aging population, the elderly, like as a target group, which creates a lot of fears, like how can they cope in this future economy? For example, when the government is using the online systems, then for an old lady to come to one governmental office and get all of the services that they need just there with no paperwork is much easier than having to, in a typical bureaucratical model, to go into different. Or it's much easier for me to take my grandmother and her ID card and show her the bank account using the online bank when we're sitting on the couch. There have been many programs from 2002 when a specialized, kind of very simple ICT courses that were financed by telcos and banks that were educating around 20% of the older population on how to use computers, how to use public services, how to read mail, and we started pretty early with this. So of course you have to increase the skills of people, but you also can design the services in a way that they don't need you to be an IT genius. Digital prescription doesn't require any IT skills. It's enough if you phone the doctor, wherever you are, whatever the doctor is, and he can create a digital prescription that you can pick up from the closest pharmacy. So all the skills you need is calling and giving your ID document. That's the best example of how digital services could work. But the ideal case that Estonia is working on now is zero bureaucracy. You don't need to ask for the service because the government putting the data together, like, for example, having a baby, will just exchange the data that they have about you and just pay you the mother benefits without any kind of initiation from your side. The same with pension increase, the same with kind of medication. This can be automatized and brought to the level from an administrational point of view when there is no need for many people to even have IT skills or knowledge because things will just happen for them.
Great. And can we go back to the screen with the prioritized questions on, please? And Anna, while you've got the microphone, can you pick up question 2 now? Then I'm going to ask Paul to pick up question 1. Question 2 asked about how did you succeed in overlapping, I guess this means overcoming, the fears for the transition to digital governance from the old model of governance. This required people to change their attitude. How did you provoke and support that change?
Yeah, you see, Estonia development path in the 90s, when we re-established independence, did not include having a lot of resources or a lot of workforce. So we did not actually consider building a typical model in the very beginning. We could not afford having government offices around the country. You can consider Estonia as a kind of a small city in a way, but with a very different density of population. So all of these kind of challenges realized in our case, and this led to kind of a more common understanding and the digital leadership and alignment throughout different levels of government. At the same time, fear comes from the lack of experience. I can tell you 3 days about how great iPhone is. If you have never used a smartphone, you will not understand it. So positive practice is the basis for building the trust. Once you have some digital service, people will use it, they will gain more trust into the government capability, into the services, into the technology, and this trust will gradually grow like it has grown.
Yeah. So did you provide incentives or public education or demonstration projects to really make people adopt the new technologies?
Sure, of course. There are in many shopping malls, there are different campaigns on how to use the services, a lot of campaigns about what kind of e-services you can use so you don't have to go to any government office. Tax, let's take the e-tax, the basic example from 2000 already. When you're doing the tax declaration, you don't have to put the data together. It's all there. You just log in. You see in 3 minutes all the calculation. What's the money the government will refund you? And your motivation to do it is actually to spend 3 minutes of your life, get the money back from the government, and not have to go anywhere at all. So
Great.
kind of built-in service design motivators and legal ones as well, like making services cheaper when they're used online.
Great. I think a lot of people will want to know more about that. Jonas, before we come to you, I want to just ask Paul for a minute to comment on the question that's been deleted, which was the one about using ICTs to tackle this digital divide, particularly with elderly citizens it mentioned and other people who are otherwise marginalized. Any particular tips?
Yeah,
and then Martin, I want you to come to the next question.
It also said that should we maintain parallel systems?
Yeah.
And I think actually conceptually that's wrong here. Because there's a lot of IT which is already there today that can be used, and you don't really know that it is IT. So someone who is in the care position or a family member or the elderly people themselves are using it perhaps without knowing them. So in Eindhoven there is a company developing smart textiles that can monitor the condition of your elderly parent. There is already available some kind of display that is put on a table where elderly people can play cards, and then a camera is following their movements, and so you can detect something from it that actually informs the care workers, is this elderly person participating or not? There are smart toothbrushes, those kind of things. So it's not only about going online or not, and I think it's actually really the wrong perception if we think about maintaining parallel systems. No, it's going to be combined systems. It can go wrong, of course, because the bad example is, of course, the remote control of the television that my elderly parents can't use because it's too complex. Wrong IT, wrongly designed. So fixing it means certainly something else that has been mentioned here. You need to work together very closely between the people who are the users and the designers and the ones that will bring it in the market. And I'm fairly optimistic about that because that's where you see precisely now a lot of very interesting innovation happening.
Great, thank you very much. Jonas, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, and maybe to add on the earlier question, I think what we learn from the approach which was done here, a lot of comments that I get in the Netherlands is that, but we have legacy. We're not having a green field and we're not starting from scratch. So I'm saying internally, why not? We don't need a change strategy, but we need a disruption strategy. So let's act like there's nothing and start from scratch. And use then the infrastructure that we need, but start with the end user and start building from there, and that helps us in working on that. Maybe to add.
Exactly.
Great, thank you very much. Martin, pick up the next question if you would.
So I'm just going to read it. How far do you think that digital transition is being used by the economic powers to control citizens and reduce self-organization possibilities of the people?
So this is a skeptical question, yeah?
It is. And
Yeah.
I think there's very good reason for being skeptical, actually, because yes, the economic powers are using it to the fullest. Why not? I mean, what's new? I think we need to treat the digital environment just as we are treating the physical environment. We need good environmental policies. So again, coming back, it's not just something that is going to help us. It's actually something that we need to manage, that we need to have good principles for. Now, the sad thing is, we don't have the principles yet. We don't have the good policies. They are still being, found out, and they are being developed. So I think the short answer is yes. If we don't do something, if we don't, let's say, put targets on good digital environment out there when we do procurement. This is a very, very strong instrument. When we do local, like the zoning laws, the digital zoning laws, it's a wild west. You can plow through, wonderful commons as it were. We're back in 115 years when the men who made America and Europe were just putting railroads and steel factories without asking. This is the state we have at the moment in the digital. So we have to think of it like we think about good environment. Open data, yes, that's like clean water on right terms with the right licenses. But we don't have them yet. So therefore, we have to do exactly what you say and what is happening in Eindhoven and many other places. Engage in these transition, whether it's projects. There are plenty of projects where you can go together with colleagues also from other cities and other communities to learn. And I think this is really, the instruments that can take us there are really the crucial step to close this gap.
Great, thank you very much. Now, we will come back to these questions in a minute. Can we have another look at our word map, please, from our second question this morning? Thank you very much. So, hasn't changed that much, but healthcare and jobs seem to be coming up a little bit. Thank you very much. Keep voting. Now, old technology. Who wants to just ask a question of one of our panelists? Anybody like to do that? Raise your hand, shout a question out. We'll see if they want to answer it. Anybody here waiting to do that? No? All digital natives now, it seems, right? So all wanting to use the digital. Can we go back to our list of our wall of questions then from Slido, if you don't mind? Thank you very much. So, Martin, you've given us a comment about that. Anybody want to say something different to what Martin said about, the use of this digital thing to control, the fake news, the using digitization deliberately to disrupt, confuse, manipulate people? Anyone else concerned about that on the panel? Yeah. Paul?
Perhaps a few words about that. I mean, that's nowadays kind of part of the broad terrain of cybersecurity and what's happening in terms of hacking or in terms of false information or all of that. And I think we need to take it very seriously, because we are not talking about just digital. We are talking about democracy, we are talking about autonomy, we are talking about security, and there are real threats out there. It's very good that people are becoming aware of that and starting to spot that these kind of actions are happening with malicious intent, or perhaps sometimes also involuntarily. You have got these kind of echo chambers. People are just repeating what they are saying to each other. So you need to break that open. Also, actually, because you want to keep control. So you want to have a debate about what is happening with your data and what is right and what is wrong and how you look at people that are differently. So talk about migrants, for example. You need to create nearness, cohesion. That means you cannot afford that you have all these islands. Very challenging, super responsible to do that. If we don't do it, we are going to be lost. Can we do it? Yeah, absolutely. There are many of these. Actually, I'm quite optimistic about the bottom-up initiatives that are happening. So peculiar enough, while there are perhaps these big kind of entities that are using our information and you feel that you are perhaps powerless, at the same time you see sharing economy coming up, you see crowdfunding, crowdsourcing coming up, you see a lot of social media discussion coming up. So that's perhaps also the positive side to it.
Very good. Anna?
Yeah, I totally agree that there are big risks in this area on the fake news and like economic powers, but it doesn't mean we don't have to use the digital technologies and the modern technologies in order to identify them and prevent them, like blockchain that provides the accountability and transparency that we use, that European Union now uses as well, so we can, with no people, sort of distantly monitor whether the integrity of the rules that we have established, or using artificial intelligence maybe to help us plan the future financial crisis if this was overlooked by actually so many great minds, because it's just technically not possible to take into account so much information. So it's definitely going to help us, but as any technology, as any tool can be used for good and for bad, I agree on the ethical side of it.
Great, thank you. Now, panelists, what I want you to do is that I want you, Jonas, to take the bottom question here, if you don't mind. Yep. Can inhabitants still use other ways of reaching public authorities in Eindhoven? Is there a risk of exclusion? And then I want, Anna, you to focus on the rural and urban areas. Can we keep the screen still for a moment? And then, Martin, I want you to focus on this question about the likely impact of digitalization on urban and spatial development and land uses. Okay, so Jonas, off you go.
Yeah, I think you always need to have the possibility to to make it possible for citizens to come and use it. But the way we do it now is that we, if someone comes in, we help them and we do it for them. And we use the metaphor, we don't want to give people a fish, but we want them learn how to fish.
Yeah.
So instead of, so that they come there, have a good cup of coffee, have a good conversation, have a great experience, and learn them to use the services that we want. So yes, it needs to be there, it needs to be possible, but as an offline trigger to help people to become digital themselves.
Great, thank you very much. Anna, what about the rural and the marginal areas in Estonia? Do they participate to the same degree as the people living in Tallinn and the other cities?
Well, since they can use the basic infrastructure, the National for Data Exchange, the ID, which is also nationwide, these are two tools they don't have to invest to. They can focus, they can simplify their administration, if you mean of the local government level, or some smaller regions, so they have more time to develop the services and think about that. And since with the EID, from the banking, taxation, public services of different types are brought online, the issue comes down to whether you have an internet connection there that is available, that is for a normal price. I've seen kind of a question about that. I don't know how to get to the level, but in Estonia, internet access is rather affordable. I would say 3G you can get for starting from €6 in your mobile, where you can't have broadband. We're still struggling with those marginal rural areas to provide them the 100 megabit that we should. So it's going to be 1 kilometer. We still have to do around
So you've got a final kilometer to go.
Yes, so it's about the accessibility of the internet in whatever form it may be. It might be actually, we don't always need the broadband in this regard. We might just go with a 5G very well, because mobile devices, these are devices people are commonly using.
Yes. Okay, great. So Martin, this question, and the last question, Paul, on mobility patterns, if you can, please, and then we're going to close the session.
So I'm going to set you up, Paul, here, because I think the fundamental answer is yes. So the fact that we can now track and monitor everything that's going on, including the almost real-time valuation of every square meter in the city, is going to make urban planning and planning in general much more transparent. Now, fundamentally, there are two perspectives on planning. One is economic, and one is, well, the quality of life, you could say. And from much urban planning is happening now from a purely economic perspective right now. So I think two things are fundamentally going to change. It will become transparent how these two converge. So it will be much more visible to the citizens who look at, the plans that the city is making. What is the impact? So I think that is fundamentally going to challenge the role of the planners, because it'll be, as you mentioned also, Paul, much more, I would say, symmetric. So the sharing, the participation will be much higher. Now, the other thing is that when the city becomes essentially like, do you know the computer game called SimCity, where you can play around the city? As this situation approaches now, and you can in real time play around with things, you also get the real problems of optimizing the city, including that what you thought was a good idea turns out not to be a good idea. So I think we will see in the first move, oh wow, we can optimize all kinds of things, but very, very quickly we will realize, oh damn, it was the old principles actually of identity that won. So I think we will see first a shift towards optimizing, and then actually falling back on very old principles of urban and spatial planning. But we just don't have let's say, the instruments yet for the digital side of that. But I think they will have to emerge, driven actually by the local level, and then hopefully coming together on good for good principles, how these very, very slow timelines meet the very fast real-time ones.
Thank you, Martin. Quick comment, Anna?
Yeah, just a very quick one. We're speaking about only how the government does things themselves and think of what is right for the town and the planning, but what about people? The digital technology allows actually to ask the users, the
Yeah.
people who live in these local areas. It's part of the co-creation mechanism. We should put this definitely in, because if we think something is right, it doesn't mean that the end user will actually enjoy the bus stop there. So not only the big data, but engaging real people and the real participants of this environment would be critical.
Thank you very much. Paul, the last comment about the mobility question.
Yeah, about the mobility. So here are a number of points I mentioned: mobility, smart manufacturing, smart working. There's an important European initiative, digitizing industry, to look at so that traditional industries are also going to go more digital. There's also a big debate happening about sourcing back manufacturing into Europe. What is common in that is that you get more high added value. So it's not a traditional manufacturing anymore. You need to think about how people will work differently, add value differently, and there are new opportunities there for sure. But that's like a real industrial strategy that you can develop at all levels, whether this is city, rural, whether it's the national and also the European level. And I think in that we also need to look kind of outside. So it's not about Europe only, it's also about how we work together in international supply chains, to use the somewhat horrible word, how we work together with Africa, how we can reduce the pressure of migration, because actually we are also going to use digital there in the context of manufacturing and services provision. So these are difficult policy questions, but they are not more difficult for us than they are for anyone else in the world. So I think we've got a good basis in Europe to tackle those.
Great, thank you very much indeed. This has been a fantastic panel, and in a minute I'm going to ask you to thank them. But firstly, I'm just going to do a quick summary and then give you some information. So what I take from this conversation is not just this optimism and this enthusiasm for the opportunities that come from this new generation of exponential technologies, and particularly how they interact both with public services, with citizen participation, but also with economic processes. But I think I've heard you say very, very clearly that it's an opportunity to put citizens right at the center of a new way of organizing the world and to organize around people. If you like, it's not so much about smart systems, it's about smart citizens and how they get to lead their lives. That was interesting. On the big question about whether these new technologies will alter the spatial development, the territorial pattern of Europe, I don't think we've yet had a conclusive answer, and we should keep this big question open. But I think you all said in one way or another that these technologies have the power to reduce some of the rigidities in spatial patterns. And I'd like to hear more about that from our speakers during the course of the day. Then I think three other things were said very, very clearly. Firstly, this requires proactive policies and proactive leaderships from all levels of government. Nothing good happens in this space accidentally, as it were. It does require a new kind of public governance around the digital space to curate, to create opportunities, to co-create with others. We heard particularly from Martin, but everybody emphasized this, the importance of partnerships as ways of taking forward opportunities, organizing around citizen groups, thinking about their needs, public, private, local, regional, urban, national, urban, rural, and if, as it were, the whole idea of cascading capability or bringing together capability from different places. And then lastly, I think we heard something very important about Europe's role in the world and the leadership role perhaps of Europe on addressing the ethical issues that are here, the issues that are to do with public goods and how to secure them through digitalization, and the issues to do with standard setting and standard dissemination. So from my point of view, really interesting conversation. Let's now give a big vote of thanks to our brilliant panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.